Hello, everyone. Chag Sameach, Chag Atzmaut Sameach, Happy Israel Independence Day. And welcome to those who have joined us for the first time. Thank you. I see together Sister Claire and
Hello, I'm Melissa. I'm joining with my mom, who I think has been here before,
oh, hello.
Diane.
Good to have you. Okay, we're expecting also Sister Claire from France.
Oh, wow.
Okay, if does everybody have the text sheet?
Yes.
Okay, great. And let's dedicate our study today also in memory of Vicki Miller. This would have been which birthday of hers today, Gary?
75.
75. Vicki would have been 75 today. So we dedicate this study to her, the honor of her memory.
Thank you.
Okay. All right then, let's get going. Apologies for last week, those that don't get our Or Hamidbar newsletter in which we announced we wouldn't be having class. We neglected to send out the separate judges reminder, so I apologize for that. We'll try to be more careful in the future. And why don't we get going? We are in the middle of the story of Gideon or Gideon. A number of chapters are devoted to this particular character. And a very complex character, right? He taught us a lot about interaction between a human being and God, because he kept wanting signs and symbols and wonders, and he kept getting them. So there's an interesting relationship there. But of course, that's not what it was about. It was about getting him in the position to be a savior, one of the shoftim. In this case, shofet, not in the meaning of judge as in legislative judge, but judge as in leader and military leader, a man of military prowess. And then we saw that while he still reserved the right to get signs and wonders from God, he designed his own approach to guerrilla warfare. That's what we did 2 weeks ago. And we had this tension, which we will often have, we'll have today as well, in the history of interpretation between one understanding and another one, which are very different. And in the story 2 weeks ago, if you remember, we might have understood that he wanted to have a small group of people so that they would be swift and, lean and mean in their military escapades, in their military achievements. And yet Josephus points out with a lot of rather logically that no, it was a small group and it was not the bravest. It was the most cowardice of the small group in order to show that it was God's victory. It wasn't the people's victory, it was God's victory. So you could understand God's victory as the Nebuchs of the world being successful against the great heroes, or you could understand God's victory through the fact that he was able to give Gideon the wisdom to put together a very courageous small group of people. One way or another, it was about God's part in the victory. And that's going to come up again as well today. That's always in the background. Who is really behind the scenes, which is always the case almost entirely with biblical narratives. Not always the kernel of the narrative. I'm talking now across the Bible, but as it is presented to us in the context of the 24 books of Hebrew scripture, then it's really about God being in the background, right? A good example would be Esther, the story of Esther, where God's not even mentioned, as you know, in the entire book of Esther, the 10 chapters of Esther. Yet it's clear from the context of the book of Esther in the Hebrew Bible that God is in the background. God's in the background of that story. Okay. And here I think we're welcoming Sister Claire right now. Okay. Welcome, Sister Claire from France. We welcome you to our group. Were you able to get? If you don't have the study sheet today, we're just doing directly from the book of Judges. So we're in Judges 11, Judges chapter 8 today. And as I've been trying to do at Madalena's behest, to give a title, the title of today, it could have been Gideon's leadership styles, but I chose managerial styles because it reminded me sometimes of what all of us are taught in well, it's also leadership training. It's the same. What we're taught when when we're managing other people. And so we'll take a look at his the various characteristics that he shows in today's. Okay, so we're in the middle of the story of Gideon. We're not done yet. We won't be done yet. It comes to a particular apex today, but we have actually, it's not even the entire chapter. I've left the rest of the verse of the chapter for next time. But why don't we begin? And Jackie, would you like to read for us 1 to 3?
Did you say me, Rabbi?
Yes, please. Yes, Jackie.
Oh,
1 to
okay.
3.
1 to 3. And the men of Ephraim said to him, "Why did you do that to us, not calling us when you want to fight the Midianites?" And they rebuked him severely. But he answered them, "After all, what have I accomplished compared to you? Why, Ephraim's gleanings are better than Abiezer's vintage? God has delivered the Midianite generals Zareb and Zeb into your hands. And what was I able to do compared to you?" And when he spoke in this fashion, their anger against him abated.
Okay, I'm just going to gently and kindly correct the way that you read why. Of course, the word why is usually in a question. In this case, it's in an exclamatory statement. Why? Ephraim's gleanings are better than Abiezer's vintage, right? With an exclamation mark. Do you remember from the beginning of the story? Well, first of all, the context here is Ephraim. Remember, Ephraim is going to go on to be the tribe of the kingship later on in the northern kingdom in the book of Kings. Ephraim is descended from Yosef, and there's that constant competition between Judah on one hand, Joseph on the other hand, as leaders with the other tribes around. Amongst the tribe of Ephraim, and by the way, Ephraim is usually interpreted as being from the word of being fertile. There's a constant fertility is a constant theme all over the ancient Near East. It could be probably all over the world, I'm guessing. But when it comes to our own Israelite tradition, fertility is always a dual system of agriculture and having children, and in particular having male progeny. Sorry, I can't apologize. Or I would apologize. I guess I should apologize for our tradition, but things have changed, as we well know. And so, and in Ephraim, there was one of the clans, Abiezer, and we already heard him say when God was choosing Gideon, he says, "Well, you don't want me. I'm not me. I'm from the little guys. I'm from the I'm the insignificant amongst my own clan." Whether it was false humility, whether it was real humility, whether this tells us something about his own character and how he's developed, I choose to see it that way. He was a very unlikely hero. He was chosen to be so. And then when he's successful, as he was in the previous chapter, if you didn't get to the previous chapter with us, go back and read it beforehand. Always a good thing before our sessions together to read the previous chapter. But he was very successful in his battles there, but he went at it alone. Remember, it was a very small group, and there was a bit of a war before that. And the commentaries debate whether this is just about that story of the 300 men or this the greater battle. I would agree that it's part of the greater battle. But they say to him, Ephraim, how come you didn't include us? Why didn't you? How come you left us out of it? And if you look back, it's not entirely clear they really wanted to be in it. And we're going to see something like that now. But after the fact of success, everybody wants to be part of it, right? What is it? There's a saying like that, isn't there? A saying? There's many authors or many. What's the saying? Help me out, Richard. What's it? Many something to success. There's many. Harold, you usually know what I'm trying to say. Dan, come on, you guys are my linguistic saviors here.
On the tip, on the tip of the tongue.
Anyway, so, but I think we all know what it means. Once somebody's successful, everybody wants to take credit for it, right? And of course they can't take credit.
It's failure has but one author, and success has many.
Thank you. Right. So they wish to have been the authors, right?
Yes.
Why, or as academics would say, why didn't you include me in the festschrift in honor of our beloved teacher? By the way, I have to mention, I know I've mentioned a lot, but I'm so psyched. I'm so happy that my teacher, my good friend, Professor Yair Zakovich, received the Israel Prize today on Yom Ha'atzmaut and Israel Independence Day for his achievements in the studies of and teaching of Bible. And there's another professor who was a teacher of mine, a Professor Shiloni. I took 3 courses in my career at Hebrew University. I had a single major as a BA already. You could do that in my day. And so I don't have a liberal arts education, as many of you know. I don't have a wide education, but I had to take 3 courses in my first year that were not from the Bible department. And one of them was an introduction to Japanese society and culture, which I thought that would be interesting. I don't know anything about that. And Professor Shiloni was my teacher, and he was such a wonderful, wonderful man. I was joyed to see he was also received the Israel Prize. But back onto the topic. And how did I even get off to so I remember when my teachers were the ones I was close with, and somebody set up a collection of essays and studies in honor of somebody. Of course, the ones that were not asked to be in it were highly insulted. The same thing here in the military world. Why didn't you call us? We would have been part of this war as well. Now, he could have gone a lot of ways. He could have said, you didn't want me. I'm not part of the Atzula. I'm not part of the aristocracy. I'm not one of the chosen people. I'm from an insignificant clan, and an insignificant family from an insignificant clan. And yet he chose to answer them in a different way. And he answered them in a wisdom saying kind of a way, in a metaphorical kind of a way. And what does he use for metaphors? What's been used all during the stories of Gideon in the last, I think we've done this 2 sessions already or 3. He's always referring to agriculture, right? There's always this thing about where, remember, he was threshing his wheat in the place where you'd make the wine, or he was making his wine with the press or whatever it was. There he was. It's all about agriculture is always in the background.
Harvey.
I'm sorry.
Harvey.
Oh, okay. And agriculture is in the background, in opposition to the enemy. The enemy in these stories is Midian, and they seem to be, they seem to be that the Midianites are wanderers. They have camels, right there. All right, where's? I can't find him. I want to mute our friend Richard. Okay. All right. Again, please remember, if you're not going to make any noise, just mute yourselves. Okay. So how does he answer them? He says, "Why, Ephraim, your gleanings are the grapes or the olives." It's used. The Hebrew is used for both, that are left on the tree afterwards. In other words, they're on the vine. They're not worth picking. If you have grapes, you get the big, fat, juicy clusters, and the little ones, or the dried ones, you leave them on. Right? The same thing with olives. Those are the gleanings. He says, Ephraim, your gleanings, your secondhand clothes are nothing compared to my clan's absolute best. You think of your own metaphor, but the metaphor is taken from the world of nature, and and so how does he handle them? In a very clever way, right? He doesn't know, very non-confrontational. Of course, we can imagine him smiling to himself, saying, this is all me. I did this. But he wants to keep the peace between the clans. We still have a lot of noise going on here. If somebody can. Found it. Okay. All right. Again, please unmute yourself if you want to say something. If you can't, just wave your hand. Okay. So that's the first case of his inner inner Ephraim is inner. He's part of Ephraim. It's just that the higher ups are asking this. The inner tribal kind of relationships he has, and now we move on to another interaction that he has with people from other tribes, or people from his tribe, or from other tribes. It doesn't say who they're from, which tribes they're in. But I guess we could check the geography to see exactly. But it's other Israelites. Okay. So Gail, do you want to read? Are you up to reading, Gail? Just have to unmute yourself.
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay. All right, Dan, you want to read for us 4-7, please?
Gideon came to the Jordan and crossed it. The 300 men with him were famished, but still in pursuit. He said to the people of Sukkot, "Please give some loaves of bread to the men who are following me. They are famished, and I am pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." But the officials of Sukkot replied, "Are Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give you bread to your troops?" "I swear," declared Gideon, "when the Lord delivers Zebah and Zalmunna into my hands, I'll thresh your bodies upon desert thorns and briars."
So, a very different tactic he's taking with these folks, right? There's nothing flattering about this particular section. But what I noticed in going over this today, something I hadn't noticed in the past, or perhaps I did notice in the past and made note of it, but I just don't remember that I noticed it, which is probably the case. In any case, when you look at the Hebrew, it's interesting, the body parts that are used. Some of it, but not all of it, shows up in the English. So if I go over it again, so he goes towards the Jordan River, right? He crosses the Jordan River, and he's got these 300 men. We're back to that particular story, the 300 men, and they're starving, right? But they're still in pursuit of the other of the enemy troops. And so the key word here is, while they are famished, they are in chase. It's in Hebrew, it's in one word. Here is but still in pursuit. Yeah, okay. So you can imagine famished with their bodies are famished. I imagine the upper part of the body, and their legs are still running though. They're almost running on empty. That's the impression that I get from this. And he comes to Sukkot, which is a place mentioned quite often, on the other side in Transjordan, the other side on the east bank of the Jordan, the area of the east bank. And he asks them for food. Now, does it mean just loaves? Does it mean all food? I don't know that it matters so much, but this is that you have a similar story with David and his marauders as well. That if we continue afterwards to the book of Samuel, we'll get to those stories. But a similar kind of thing. The people who are fighting on behalf of the people, the soldiers fighting on behalf of the people, expect that they'll be supported by the people. It's in their benefit, and of course that they're tired. But this story goes to, where does Gideon place in the hierarchy of the tribes, the hierarchy of Ephraim? Where is he of noble blood? Is he thought as an important person? Well, in the previous story, not really. They said, "Why didn't you include us?" And he kissed up to them. In this story, he says, well, "We need your help." And in the subtext here is, this is for you. You benefit from this, from us chasing the Midianites, these two Midianite kings. And so they ask him, I'm sorry, so he says to them, I'm in the second verse now, in the English it says, "Please give me some loaves of bread to the men who are following me." In Hebrew it says "asher beraglai," which is a rare and interesting expression. It literally means who are with my feet. Asher beraglai. They're with my feet, meaning they're running, they're pursuing together with me. But I think that the author or the narrator used that word "regul" because a key word in this whole section is hands, right? We were give them to me. I'm in pursuit of these people so that they may be delivered into my hands, is the idiom, so we can catch them. And then, of course, they're answered, well, are they in your hands yet? Again, the emphasis on the hands. In your hands yet? No. So you haven't been successful. So we're not going to reward you with food. Of course, it's ridiculous because they need this in order to succeed. But no, succeed first and then come back to us and we'll give you food. That's almost what it is. It's very miserly, almost even cruel. And suddenly Gideon's managerial or leadership tactic changes wildly, right? Instead of being diplomatic, he goes to the opposite and he literally curses them. And what is the curse? The curse is, again, the language, I'll thresh your bodies upon desert thorns and briars. It's taken from agriculture. Threshing is what you do with the wheat, right? With the stalks of wheat, you thresh them in order to separate the kernels from the chaff or whatever the language is. And here he's doing it. The metaphor goes from the world of agriculture to the opposite, to the anti-agriculture, which are the thorns and the briars. I think this is just brilliant the way this story is told here. And the threshing comes from the language of how you make bread, and it's bread that he's asking for, right? Any questions or comments on this section 4 to 7? Go ahead. Just speak up.
Yeah, are these people on foot or are they on horseback?
There's nothing about horses here. If anything, maybe it would be on camels, but the Midianites have camels. We're going to see the camels, but they're on foot. And the language speaks to that, right? The English says in pursuit, the Hebrew says by feet, with their feet. They're on legs, so to speak.
Right. And there's hundreds of them, right?
There's 300.
Okay.
300. Gary.
Couldn't it also be that they didn't trust him? Gideon isn't the most consistent person, and they don't believe what he's saying.
That could be. He hasn't proven himself. The language, yeah. From the eyes of the narrator, the way the story is told, as we often do, right? It's good that you're saying couldn't have been. We often tell the story. What? They don't know that? Of course they know that, right? But you could very well, maybe they didn't know it. But what it goes to show, though, Gary, we could agree upon is that he didn't have the stature that he expected himself to have. Otherwise, he wouldn't have lashed out to them in the anger the way he did. On the other hand, he's got a real problem, right? Yes. Did somebody else want to say something?
I just wanted to know. Remember, Sukkot is on the east side of the Jordan, and it was occupied by which tribe?
I didn't take out the map, but my guess is it's Menashe, who's
Menashe.
also from the Joseph tribes, right?
Yeah. Okay. I was just curious.
Yeah. No, but that's a good question because if it was a totally different tribe, you could say, well, they don't know from him, right? But
Yeah.
Menashe, Ephraim are brother tribes.
They're brothers. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else before we go on? Okay. So now, part 2 or part 3 of Gideon's interaction with the others. Part 1 was diplomatic. Part 2 was confrontational, but in detail. There's a lot of details now. So Gary, why don't you read for us part 3, verses 8 to 9.
From there he went up to Penuel and made the same request of them. But the people of Penuel gave, so he threatened the people of Penuel. When I come back safe, I'll tear down your tower.
Right. So this is a shortened, right? We don't. He could have told the whole story, but why? We know already what's going to happen. So instead of threshing them with thorns and bristles or whatever, I'm going to tear down your tower. Penuel is an important place. Penuel, the face of God. You remember that's where Jacob had his encounter with that man, the angel, or with God, with himself. That's Penuel. And so he's kind of gone across the Jordan River to Sukkot on the other side, and then gone up north a little bit. I think that's what it would look like on the map. Not that I think that's all that important, but he's still in pursuit with his 300 chevra. he's in pursuit of the of these
kings.
guys, right? Of the Midianites. And so we'll have to remember these threats for later on. Okay. Klaus, you want to read for us, please? We're in verses 10 to 12.
Now Zeba and Zalmunna were at Karkor with an army of about 15,000. These were all that remained of the entire host of Kedemites, for the slaying numbered 120,000 fighting men. Gideon marched up the road of the tent dwellers, up to the east of Noba and Yogbeha, and routed the camp, which was off guard. Zeba and Zalmunna took the fight, which Gideon pursued. He captured Zeba and Zalmunna, the two kings of Midian, and threw the whole army into panic.
So I think that this chapter, this section, we're meant to be very impressed because his people are famished, right? They've been running and running and running in pursuit. They finally caught up with them, and while it is not detailed, again, it seems to be God is behind this because they had no rear guard. He caught them off guard and slaughtered them. The numbers here are kind of very round, very large numbers. I'm not sure that we're to, I don't know what to do with them other than the fact that the narrator really wanted us to be impressed. But they're down to the last 1,500, and this will not be the only story, and it already was a story of winning the war, winning the battle because the enemy is in panic, right? And I think that has a lot to do with showing that God is working in the background. I think from at least from the editor's point of view of this book. Okay. Any comments or questions? Alan?
Morning. Is there anything that we need to know that there are two kings mentioned here as the
You
enemy?
mean as opposed to one king?
Yes.
So we're going to see that. That's a good question. I thought of that as I continued to read, but it's not a king as an empire. These are local kings, and we don't know what the word is melech in Hebrew. Now David is melech, Melech David, King David, Shaul. They're all called melech, but also these little guys. Remember, we had this story of Adoni Tzedek in the very beginning of Judges. He was a king as well. I think the idea was the leader, the ruler of every kind of, perhaps there were city states. We know there were city states through historically, through archaeology, through letters, the Tel Amarna letters, and other kind of letters that were between Egypt and these city states in the land of Canaan and Canaan. So I think that's it. And it could be there were king over a few hundred people or a few thousand people, right? I think the numbers are inflated. Again, that's not my strong suit is the historiosity or the historical aspects, archaeology, but I'm sure we know how many people were in a typical one of these large sites. The archaeologists know how to tell that kind of stuff. Hatzor being the greatest one, the biggest one from a size point of view, and we had that. So and so that's different than say, Melech Aram, the king of the Arameans. That seems to be a larger thing, king the way we think of it now. Yes, Ella.
I think the closest would be chieftain. They were like chieftains of.
Right, except for chieftains, we there's a different word. Well, we use it depends on what source of the Torah we're talking about, but chieftains is usually nisi'im that we use today for president. Nasi means lifted up. Somebody's been lifted up by the people to be above them, nominated, elected. Today I would say that you are right though in the fact that what we would call a chieftain in any other language, it's not a king with a palace and a court and all that kind of stuff. Perhaps we just don't know, but what we will find, and this is as per your question, Alan, is that there are a number of Midianite kings, and also the idea that they don't have one piece of land. That Midianites are in different places. Remember, we talked about the fact that it couldn't have been far from Egypt for Moses to escape to Midian, to Yitro, who was not a king, but a Kohen, a priest. Okay. All right. So, Eileen, would you like to read the next section? Were there any other statements or questions about this section? Sorry. Okay. Then let's go on to the next.
On his way back from the battle of the ascent of Heres, Gideon, son of Joash, captured a boy from among the people of Sukkot and interrogated him. The latter drew up to him a list of the officials and elders of Sukkot, 77 in number. Then he came to the people of Sukkot and said, "Here are Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you mocked me, saying, are Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hands, that we should give your famished men bread?" And he took the elders of the city, and bringing them desert thorns and briars, he punished the people of Sukkot with them. As for Penuel, he tore down its tower and killed the townspeople.
Okay. So let's take it piece by piece.
Whoa.
They capture a boy, right? Okay. And this is a feature in a lot of stories, right? And to this, to this very day, you capture somebody who is not threatening, and you interrogate them. Really, across history, we have these kind of things. I'm thinking right now of a group of old, or an old man, or was it a group in the Lamed Hey? I think an old man. There's this story of in 1948 in the area of what's now Gush Etzion, of the story of the 35. They were from Bnei Akiva, I guess in Palmach, right? The Palmach, but they're a group of Bnei Akiva from the Bnei Akiva youth movement who were soldiers, young soldiers, and they were on their way, and they came across an old man who was non-threatening, and they deliberated what to do. This is historical, right? This is not a folktale. And they decided that they're not going to kill him, and they let him go. And he told the village, or the soldiers, the Arab soldiers in the area, where they were, and they were slaughtered. There's a kibbutz Lamed Hey, if you know the kibbutz of the 35. It's that area in the hillsides from, say, doesn't matter. Okay, so that's just a story that comes up right now because yesterday was Yom HaZikaron, Memorial Day, and those kinds of things is what we're thinking of in these days. The different stories of Gvura, of heroism, and the dilemma that soldiers face. So here we have this situation where this kid is captured, and what's he going to do with him? He interrogates him. What does he interrogate him for? Who are the leaders? And he comes up with 77. Just a second, Ella, I'll get to you. 77 names are kind of a typological round number, 77. That means a lot of the elders of that particular, of Sukkot, of that city, of that clan, whatever. And it's interesting because there are commentators in the last 100 years that have said, oh, this shows that in ancient Israel, even the kids knew how to read and write. It depends on how you translate that. You could understand the Hebrew to say that. And Koifman makes a big deal about saying, no, it doesn't mean that he wrote them out himself. He dictated the list, and he brings an example from the language of Jeremiah. Jeremiah didn't write down his prophecies himself. The same word is used, the same root, katav, is used in this form. What did Jeremiah do? He dictated his prophecies to his scribe, Baruch the scribe. Anyway, so then you get these 77 names, and I can remember studying this with Zakovich. We give honor to him today, and him turning to everybody. He says, it's, what do we have here? We have a hit list. It's a hit list, right? That's a way of foreshadowing what's about to happen. Ella, did you want to say something about this aspect?
This is called Nativ Lamed Hey.
Nativ Lamed Hey, thank you. Nativ Lamed. Nativ means the way, the path of the Lamed Hey. Yes, thank you for that. Okay, so yes, Klaus.
Did he have any discussions with God, or did he do all that on his own? Did God want him to do that, or was he just a madman that went around killing people?
Well, he hasn't. Let's differentiate. Let's um, uh, gives, there's killing, there's killing. God designated him in those conversations and the angel in the beginning of the story to be the one who would be the savior of the Israelites. That entails killing the enemy. And he's killing these, he didn't kill these two kings. He's kept them alive. The story needs him to keep them alive for now, at least. And then the ones he's killing now, and I guess that's what you're referring to, are his own people. He gets this hit list. He hasn't done it. Well, we read it, but he's about to kill, although the text, the way the English has it here, doesn't exactly say that they were killed, but we'll talk about that in just a second. Is he having these conversations with God? The text doesn't say so. And because the text said so beforehand in all those other cases, give me a sign, and now he's not asking for a sign, I think we're meant to deduce from that is no, he's doing this on his own. Now, is he a madman? Well, that depends on your understanding of leadership, right? One might say this is how you establish your leadership, especially military leadership. If the people don't pay taxes the way they should, they need to be punished. Now comes, how are they punished? So we look carefully at the text again, and so we see what he's doing. You mocked me and said that I'll give you bread when you have me. Well, literally, they're in my hands right now. Not that I've conquered them, not that I beat them in the war. I've got them in my hands. So that tells me that we were on track when we talked about the importance of hands and feet and bodily parts in that paragraph before in the beginning of the story. And then he says, here it says, he took the elders of the city and bringing desert thorns and briars, he punished the people of Sukkot with them. That's kind of non-committal. But the word punished here, the Hebrew, for those who see the Hebrew, in Hebrew it's vayada, which usually would be, and he knew them, he announced them, he taught them. There must is most probably a textual error here, and many of the modern scholars amend it from vayada to vayidosh, which is just it's a difference between a shin at the end or an ayin at the end. That's a very easy scribal error or an understandable scribal error, and it goes back to the language that he himself used. I will thresh them. Or now, threshing to me sounds like putting them to death, and not just scratching them a little or whipping them with the thorns. I leave it up to you, and I think that the English translation here didn't want to weigh in on that exactly. I didn't check other English translations to see what they have, but sometimes we want to remember things a little bit nicer than oftentimes than perhaps they happened in reality. But it seems to me that he is taking out his anger here. But also, it's a leadership quality, right? Is he going to be good by his word or not? Somebody else wanted to say something?
Thank you.
Okay. And then, of course, it adds as well, and the Penuelites, they lost their tower. It's interesting that remember it was Sukkot A, Penuel B, and we would expect him to go back through B, Penuel, and then to A, but maybe that's why there's this comment on his way back from the battle at the ascent of Cheres, where, in other words, it means to tell us he went back a different way. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, Koifman makes a big deal about it. Now, when I think about all that he wrote about it, I don't know if it matters that much. I don't think it matters. Anyway, and of course, the threshing with thorns is a much more colorful story, an idea, a picture than the tearing down of a tower, right? Okay, but a little bit unpleasant. Let's now we talk about what Klaus meant perhaps by saying a madman. This is unpleasant to think that a leader would do this not to the enemy but to the people themselves, right? And what's going to be the outcome of this particular managerial approach? right? This managerial style, this leadership style. Okay. So should we go on? Anything else? Okay. Alan, would you like to read 18 to 21, please?
Yes, but I have to close my window. My gardener is in the backyard. Just a second.
Is the name Zalman come from Zalmuna?
I don't think so. I think Zalman is maybe Yiddish.
Oh,
But I don't, and also Zalman is with a Zion. This is Salmana, Salmana, with a tzadi. Yeah, it's interesting. In the English, it sounds like they were names that were made up as part of the folktale. They sound alike, but Zevach and Salmana are all right. I don't know. Yes. Okay, Alan, go
Okay.
ahead. We're
Thank you.
18. Verse 18.
18 to 21. Then he asked Zebah and Zalmunna, those men you killed at Tabor, what were they like? They looked just like you, they replied, like sons of a king. They were my brothers, he declared, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if you had spared them, I would not kill you. And then he commanded his oldest son, Jether, go kill them. But the boy did not draw his sword, for he was timid, still being a boy. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said, come, you slay us, for strength comes with manhood. So Gideon went over and killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and he took the crescents that were on the necks of their camels.
Okay, a lot of interesting stuff here, but let me ask first, Alan or others, what do we learn about each of the characters from this? We have 4 characters. 2 of them speak together, the 2 kings, let's say, even though the language is it's singular, but Vayom, it says Vayomer. I think it should have said Vayomru, but in any case, we have the 2. What do we learn from the 2 kings? What do we learn about um, Gideon, and what do we learn about Yeter, his son?
It's surprising to read this, where the prisoners, Zebah and Zalmunna, tell the boy, come and kill us, slay us, because if you do that, you will achieve manhood. Strength will come.
Right. So it's not, no, they're saying it to Gideon.
Oh, not to the boy.
Yeah, kum ata, you come. The way the Hebrew is kum ata, right? You come and do it. So knowing that, Alan, what do you say about you? So it's interesting. You thought it was interesting that they're even speaking about it, right? But
Right.
what do we learn from the 2 of them? That they're the ones who say to Gideon, you do it, not your son.
Right. Because he's still, according to those 2, in a slightly inferior position. That's why they're telling him, if you do it, you will gain manhood. You will have stature.
So that one way, so now I understand why. One way is to understand it another way. The other way to understand it, and Koifman, who I'm trying to. We're on the road now, so I only brought two of the commentators with me this morning to prepare. And Koifman seems appropriate at this time because Koifman was a true Zionist scholar. Again, these are the days of Memorial Day and Independence Day of Israel. And he's writing, I think in the 50s, maybe it was early 60s. And he writes with the knowledge of being somebody who's very conscious of living in that land. We'll get to more. I have made comments since we began about the connection between the Book of Judges and Zionism, early pre-statehood Zionism, and even all the way up to some politics today. But that's why I keep quoting Koifman more. But what Koifman understands here is that there is a remnant of wisdom literature here. There are wisdom sayings, where there are some others in the story as well. And what's interesting is that it's the enemy who has in their mouths the wisdom. The wisdom is, Gideon, you do it, because what you're expecting of your son only comes with age. You're the one with the age. You can do it. Don't expect him to do it. In other words, they seem to know more about life than Gideon knows. That's the impression that I think you could get from this particular paragraph. The son is timid. And isn't it interesting, because we see today in TV and movies, all these horrible scenes about the young man who's given the gun, you do it. The new kid in the gang, you do it. That kind of, this is it seems to be an ancient motif, right? Literature. And I would imagine Dan is going to drum up, if not today, then in the next few days, some sort of a memory from classical literature, or Harold, our literary, or Alan, our experts who always bring up from other kinds of literature, this giving the sword. Interesting here is that he has his own sword, but of course that could be ceremonial. It could be yeah. Okay. So that's as far as Yeter is concerned, as far as the two kings are concerned. But what do we learn about from Gideon is that he's a bit heartless. He's a bit of a thug. Of course, maybe I'm influenced too much by mafia or gangland or terrorist scenes in movies and TV, but he seems like a insensitive thug. Do it yourself. But what he's trying to do, it seems like he's trying to pass the mantle of leadership onto his son. Again, this has to do with managerial styles, his leadership styles. He's trying to, he wants to involve his son, because a lot of this has been about him. Okay.
Rabbi, one question.
Yeah.
Quickly. Are there any other examples where the enemy is telling the person, you do it?
Not that I can think of.
Because that makes this a very specific kind of situation that Gideon finds himself in. And if somebody were to look at all of the situations that Gideon is in and extract those that are peculiar and specific to Gideon's own story, then we have something.
Well, I think that is the case. As we're going to see as we wind up today, in the next 10 minutes, we're going to see that this is a very, very special and abnormal case that we'll have to ask ourselves, so why are we learning about it? Why did they decide to tell us the story of Gideon? Right. One thing we should assume is that the amount of stories that are in the book of Judges, let's say they're 10 or 12, including the little guys, that's only some of the stories that were running around the campfires, and being passed on from elders to children orally for centuries by our ancestors, right? There had to have been so many more stories. These are the ones that made it into the book. So we have to ask, so why was it included? And so that's the background for that question you just raised now. Let me make a comment about this kind of strange detail about the crescents hanging from the necks of the camels. You'll remember that this is not the first we've heard of the camels. The camels have been mentioned already twice beforehand in this story, which led some of the scholars in the last 100 years to say, well, the Midianites were particularly wealthy when it came to camels. Perhaps that's the case. Perhaps this is just part of this way of comparing in our story those that were farmers, that were that had land, that lived off of the land farming, and Gideon represents that, and those that were nomads and maybe marauders with their camels. But then you've got this thing, the crescents. This is something that has come up a lot in archaeology, finding these little jewelry of gold of crescents, having to do probably originally with the worship of the moon. And while they are presented here as jewelry, and we're going to see later on in this story, most probably they were kameas. Is that in English, kamea? No, what do you say? What's the word?
Shields?
Well, spiritual shields. Not
Talismans?
amulets.
Ambulance.
And and just fast forwarding to the 19th and 20th century, there are a lot of amulets in Bill Gross's collection that are in the shape of half moons. Right? It's just it's a common thing. So I think it seems to me, didn't see this in the commentary, but the reason that it's mentioned here was to show just how wealthy these Midianites were, and perhaps hinting at the fact that their wealth could not have been from farming and from settling and from trade. Their wealth, while it could have been from trade, I think it's insinuating that their wealth came from being robbers, marauders. And in any case, they were so wealthy, even the camels had gold. I think that, to me, that's what this seems, although I may be reading into it too much.
I have one more comment about the two kings. I think it was like a challenge for them, for saying, "You're going to let your son kill us? You don't have, you have to be a man and do it yourself." I think it was more of a challenge. It just doesn't make any sense any other way.
Well, another way that it could make sense the way you presented it. Another way is remember at the beginning of this section, he said, "What were those people like, the ones that you killed?" It's a leading question. He says, "Well, they were your brothers," and it could be they're taunting him. They look just like you, right?
Yeah.
Like they're your brothers. They were your half brothers, perhaps. That's what. And then they add, like sons of a king. Now, are they taunting him because he's not a king and he's not treated like a king by the other people, and they're kings? Are they saying, is this a way of the narrator to put in the mouth of one of the characters foreshadowing? Because we'll see in a second, the issue of king comes up. All those are possibilities. Okay, let's go on. Okay, Roberta, would you like to read 22, 23, please?
Sure. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson as well, for you have saved us from the Midianites." But Gideon replied, "I will not rule over you myself, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord alone shall rule over you."
And we go, what?
And
That's
Gideon,
surprising.
you want to continue?
Good. Why? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Let's read to the end. Go ahead.
And Gideon said to them, "I have a request to make of you. Each of you give me the earring he received as booty." They had golden earrings, for they were Ishmaelites. "Certainly," they replied, and they spread out a cloth, and everyone threw onto it the earring he had received as booty. The weight of the golden earrings that he had requested came to 1,700 shekels of gold. This was in addition to the crescents and the pendants and the purple robes worn by the kings of Midian, and in addition to the, I can't read my own, collars on the necks of their camels. Gideon made an ephod of this gold and set it up in his own town of Ophrah. There all Israel went astray after it, and it became a snare to Gideon and his household. Thus Midian submitted to the Israelites and did not raise its head again, and the land was tranquil for 40 years in Gideon's time.
An interesting end to the story of Gideon, right? It feels like it's about to lead up to him being a king, because enough of this battle here, battle there, a tribe here, a Bissell, a tribe there. Some sort of concern that we need this leader who has shown his wisdom. He's shown he can be ruthless with his own people, and it felt like we're leading up to this. I'd say if we see what the two kings said as foreshadowing, and boom, the moment comes, be our king, and he says, "No, you have a king. It's God." Whoa. We didn't expect him to be so wise, so theological, so pious. Does this sound familiar? This answer that he gives to anybody else?
Yeah, George Washington didn't want to be king either.
Did George Washington say God is your king?
Well, maybe he was thinking it.
But does anybody remember from another place in the Hebrew Bible? Well, so if you remember the book of Samuel, and Samuel is a prophet, right? And he's with the people, and the people say, they have wars and things. We want a king. They go to Samuel, give us a king. Yes, Ella.
Shaul.
Well, before Shaul, just in the story, in the chapter before Saul, the people's demand from Shmuel, and Shmuel says, you have a king. God is your king. To which God answers to Shmuel, are you worried about me, or are you worried about yourself? Or are you worried about your standing as a prophet? Being a leader is going to be demoted if there's a king. So the same theological argument is given in 1 Samuel, I think it's chapter 8, if I remember correctly. And so, by the way, there's a lovely play on words. If you look at the top of the last Hebrew section, Vayomer Alehem Gideon, and Gideon says to them, Eshale mikem sheila, I will have a request of you. Listen to the assonance. Eshale mikem sheila, utnuli ish nezim shilalo. Ki nizmei zahav lahem ki yishmaelim, the shma, shlala, shma, the SHM, the L. That's part of the, I think that's part of this, the background, I was taught at least, of the oral background of this literature, that it was passed on. So there's always a lot of assonance and wordplay and those kinds of things. By the way, I saw a number, 1,700 shekels of gold would come out to about 50 pounds or 20 some kilo. So that's a lot of gold. Now the question is, before we get to your question, Rita Claire, what is an ephod in this context? You may remember the ephod from the Bigdei Kuhuna, the clothes of the priest of Aaron, and often it's translated as a vest-like kind of a thing, and it's pictured as a vest-like thing, and it came together with the Urim V'Tumim. It was a place for him to for the oracle to be. It's not clear that the ephod, to me, it's not clear the ephod here is a piece of clothing. It's it's some sort of an object. There's a lot of literature on it. I'll tell you, I didn't get to it. I'll try to look and see if there's anything interesting for next week. But I know that Rita Claire wanted to say something, and then Roberta. Go ahead, Rita Claire.
I was going to say something about the 40 years of tranquility. It seems like it's always in the number of 40 years in the desert, 40 years of peace.
Right. So while you are correct that 40 years is the desert, at the end of each of our episodes of the Book of Judges, we've had that same formula. This is part of what we call the Deuteronomistic editing of the book. They misbehaved. God brought up an enemy against them. They cried out. God raised a savior. That's the beginning of the editorial framework. The end always is. And then they lived happily ever after for a certain amount of years. The interesting thing here, so it's sometimes 70, sometimes it's other years. If we look, it's not always 40, at least in the Book of Judges. Why, if this means something particular here as to the wandering in the desert, I don't know. I hadn't thought about it. I'll give it some thought. But what's interesting in this particular story is there's already the word in Hebrew is mokesh. It's used here. A mokesh in modern Hebrew is a mine, like a landmine. A trap has been set already for the future, because what he did is just not allowed, right? He set up something that, according to the book of Deuteronomy, you can't set up your own kind of thing going on. There's got to be one thing. The fact that he set up his own order of worship, his own order of, maybe oracle, the text tells us that's going to be a problem in the future. We'll have to wait to see what happens with that. Roberta.
I was looking up ephod, and it's in Wikipedia. I don't know if you want to use that. Ephods used for oracular purposes were not necessarily just pieces of cloth, as they were described, not being described as being worn, but carried. And in Samuel 2:28, wear an ephod rather than carry. The Hebrew term for carry, it was either carried in the hand or on the shoulder. In this case, might have been a portable idol, which the lots were cast in front of. And some scholars have suggested that the connection between the idol and the garment is the idol was originally clothed in a linen garment, and the term ephod gradually came to describe the idol as a whole. and it might have been a container for the stones used to cast lots.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, your first comment about Wikipedia, if you want to use it, absolutely. There's a lot of good material in Wikipedia because the people that take part in editing that, hoi polloi, amcha, the people themselves around the world, there seems to be some wisdom, some herd immunity, there's herd wisdom. And very often you get some very good stuff. So it really, it depends on the particular article. There's some wonderful articles from a Jewish point of view, Jewish studies point of view, and there's some doubtable ones because you can see the people who have edited them are often coming from a very particular and non-academic way of thinking. I mentioned the fact that I don't think it's a piece of clothing in particular in this case, because when I wanted to share an image of something I saw. Can you see that?
Oh, yeah.
This is from some Christian publication, but the trap. Gideon's ephod is the trap because that's the word that's used in the language here. And you can see here the way it's imagined is something that's draped on the front of somebody's body. Okay, not that important, but yes, having to do with worship, having to do with the oracle, not entirely clear.
One last question.
Yes.
Ishmaelites, are these the descendants of Ishmael from Genesis?
Yeah, that is the idea. Does anybody remember where they come up in a similar context?
Yes, when Joseph was being sold into Egypt.
Why is it important there that they're Ishmaelites?
Because the people being taken to Egypt are in one verse referred to as Midianites and the other as Ishmaelites.
That too, but because they're traders, they're wanderers, they're nomads. Yeah, and so there's that confusion there between the two, even though they're two different lineages. But they're Abrahamic in any case. So they're kind of landsmen. They're us, but they're at a distance. Yes, Ella.
Afudah is a vest. Does that come from the same from root?
Right, an afudah as a vest does, or an ephod. We actually use, again, we bring it back to my Israel life. An ephod is
breastplate.
No, in the army is what you put on that you store your ammunition.
Right.
Those vests that you put on, you see them in movies and TVs, and maybe in your days, the older guys here were in the army. It was more like a belt. They went from belts in the tank corps. We had belts because we weren't, but the infantry, they had these larger things, and then in the end, everybody got these aphods, and they're bulletproof now as well. So a bulletproof vest, and the place where so that's interesting how that changed. But yes, that's where the modern Hebrew usage of it as a piece of clothing vest comes from, efodah. Yeah, efodah. Okay, so we covered a lot of different interesting things. For me, the most interesting was, of course, is Gideon as a leader, the different aspects of how we show leader, and then all leading up to something, he says, no, you know what, I don't want it. I don't want it, not me or not my kids. And but we're not done with this particular family yet. We'll hear more of them later. Okay. Are there any other questions or statements?
No.
No.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, again, good to have our Melissa. Good to see you and your mother and Sister Claire and everybody. Everybody, it's good to see you, and we'll see you next week. Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
I was on mute.
Jackie, see you in an hour. And